Welcome to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. No joke, I'm trying to be first. Blow smoke, you'll be dying to reverse. First cut, yo, I never do rehearse. Work until the sun goes down. Revolution like the earth goes round. Every movement is calculated. Thorns in the room and I want my crown. Yo, hate on the team, get your roof cracked. Take funds from the pot, get the proof back. Talk smack on the stand, get crossed up. Mess with the best, get locked up. Yo, never put the mic back down. Always fight, you should write that down. Like that sound through your people's speakers. Lost and found, jeepers, creepers, often bound to your fate. No time to relate, I'm one of the great rappers. Absurdity takes and worthy debates. See my jersey up in the rafters. Yo, I'm deified, spell it backwards. Y'all neophytes and your backs hurt because of how hard my rhymes hit and a variety of other factors. Yo, I'm strapped with the coin for real. Seed phrase stamped in a plate of steel. Explore your blocks like the mempool squad. Go in hard, then slow reveal. Bring in freedom cause you need it for the road ahead. And the past we tread, stack lavishly. Actually back to reality games. The faculty's here on Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorne, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy Digital. Thank you for listening to Galaxy Brains. We have a great show for you today. Ryan Adam from the office of Senator Tom Tillis and Naveen Parmar from Senator John Hickenlooper's office are here to talk with us about the Proving Reserves on Others Funds Act, the PROOF Act. Fascinating bill that was introduced on a bipartisan basis in the U.S. Senate that would help protect cryptocurrency users and consumers in the United States from commingling. It would also require that exchanges and custodians perform cryptographic attestations of proofs of reserve. Fascinating bill. It's a good discussion. Of course, we'll also check with our good friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always, to talk markets and macro. Before we get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. I am very excited about the PROOF Act. I think it would take the space in a great direction. It's a narrow but powerful bill that would directly address the types of blow-ups like FTX that plagued the industry last year. Can't wait to get to that discussion with Naveen and Ryan. But before that, let's hop right into it with Beimnet Abebe and talk about markets. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
It's always great to have you on, and so we have a great time because you're on every week. But this is a special week like every couple are. Today is Fed Day.
Yes.
The Fed has announced what?
That they are keeping rates on hold. Rates are set in the band of 525 to 550
so
right now.
Is it fair to say they announced nothing, but they said things? But they said things.
They released their statement as per usual. They kind of gave their rationale as to their decision and kind of gave an overview of, what they're concerned about, what they're watching. High level, they are seeing how financial conditions react to the tightening that we've had, particularly in the back end of the U.S. interest rate curve. They're looking into, how that's going to impact things like, credit conditions and how that's going to impact like households. And so, largely they're saying we're going to wait and see as to how things develop. And so you're seeing pretty muted price reaction to the statement. However, we are still waiting on the press conference that's going to happen in, the next 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
But, and then we should get a little bit more additional context as to, the rationale. However, there's very little in terms of pricing, in terms of additional rate hikes, for this year. And so, a lot of participants are focused on cuts. And yeah, it's an interesting day, for the statement to come out because you did have a lot of data this morning in addition to, the specifics around refunding came out. And so it looks like there's going to be a little less coupon paper and the data this morning, particularly ISM in particular was really soft.
That's the manufacturing data?
That's the manufacturing data. Prices paid was soft and so were new orders. So much so that the Atlanta GDP Now tracker went from like mid twos in like forecasting GDP to like low ones.
Oh, wow.
And so, because new orders are like a big part
Big
of it,
issue.
I believe. And so there was soft data and we had less like back end supply than the market was expecting today, all before a relatively benign FOMC statement. So you've had a pretty significant rally in U.S. yields today. We've seen the 2-year yield take out 5%. We've seen 10s, go from 493, 494 at the highs to 480 right now. The dollar has been a little bit, more bid than I would expect, given we've had a little bit of a risk-on move in stocks and bonds are rallying. However, that may just be more Eurocentric.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to keep in mind is we had BOJ earlier this week.
Yeah. What do they do? I saw. Is it yield curve control? It looked like there was because JPY USD was getting above 150 or USD,
dollar USD JPY.
Yeah.
So basically they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. That's a function of having easy monetary policy for better part of half a century, and you just can't get out of that instantaneously. And so what they did this week was say that the 1% band was really in terms of the 10-year was really more of a reference area, even though their official target for the 10-year is still technically 0%. And so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place in the sense that if they don't materially address, the bond market dynamics, their currency is going to devalue like crazy. And unless they're willing to defend it super aggressively, they either have to hike up rates and, do a little bit more enhancement of the yield curve control, or it's just more status quo and they own all the paper in the economy, all the risk assets, and their currency continues to devalue.
Right.
But high level, it speaks to kind of just the entire how disingenuous monetary policy is right now, whether it's domestic or abroad. These guys in the BOJ have literally transform their economy in the sense that it's just built on zero interest rates, and the BOJ endlessly expanding their balance sheet. If they started jacking up rates and bond prices started selling up, their banking system would be in trouble, similar to the U.S. And then in the U.S., it's wait, they have a fiscal situation that is just totally unhinged.
You don't think Powell's going to address the fiscal situation in the
no,
comments coming
not
up?
in effective.
He hasn't.
He hasn't.
Yeah.
But what is he supposed to do? He actually can't do anything about it.
It's literally outside his remit.
It is. And then if he's well, the Fed's going to have to monetize it at some point, then it's wait.
I mean, he could also get called an activist or get politically targeted if he were to do this type of stuff. Yeah. So it's tricky.
It's super tricky. But high level, it's there will be a moment of reckoning there, I think, eventually. But for me, it's just more I hate being lied to or deceived by my central bankers telling me, oh, everything's okay, we got it all managed, right? That didn't work out last time with telling me inflation's transitory, right? And I think generally there's just a lot of angst in the investor community, and just people in general. And that's why an asset like Bitcoin resonates with a lot of folks. Whether it's the traditional macro types or whether it's the guy that can't afford a home because, the Fed jacked rates to zero and
right.
Everybody bought all this property and, all the wealth effects, all that jazz. It's there's a lot of disenfranchised folks out there. And so I think it's, I continue to remain constructive on Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin's over our shoulder, right? We're around 34.5. It's basically exactly where we were when we recorded last week.
I mean, it is for all intensive purposes at the tradable high. Mm-hmm. In real size liquidity, I mean, 34,500. It is the best performing or one of the best performing assets of the year, and it's not by coincidence. You are having real size, real institutions, folks coming in and recognizing the value that's there. And it's highly differentiated. It's been uncorrelated to other risk assets as well. It's deeply liquid. They're derivatives. I mean, it's really having its moment. And, obviously the upcoming catalyst with the ETF.
Yeah.
The bull case, really writes itself. But to be honest, the bull case is made every day by these stupid central bankers. Every single day.
I mean, at least they're to your point, right? And you've been more defensive of the central bankers in the past, but it seems like you're sort of you're reaching a breaking point here.
No, I've just generally just grown frustrated, over time. I mean, because it's wait, we got to get involved in another conflict. What does that other conflict involve?
Cost money.
Cost money.
Yeah,
money you don't have, money you just print. And like if the dollar wasn't the reserve currency of the world, like this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
And there's no one there's very few folks in Congress that are like, hey guys, we got to spend a lot less, and I'm willing to take the political consequences of not spending.
It is that a very difficult
It's a political impossibility at this point.
Right.
And so, I think there's a handful of senators that talk about it, but really in terms of, rubber meets the road actions, there's limit.
You can't.
And
You
what
can't
president
get elected
is
on a message like
exactly.
that.
What president's going to get elected being like, I'm going to raise your taxes and I'm going to cut spending?
But this is what I like about why could the Fed not? I mean, we talked about how they're in their own political conundrum because they only have this very clear mandate by law, by the way, right? So if they were to start speaking out about fiscal, they could be accused of meddling in politics, and that could hurt the Fed overall. And but they're not elected representatives in the same way that Congress members and senators are. So theoretically, like they are in a position to be the the big kid in the room and offer a longer term view here, but they haven't.
I mean, let's just be honest. Like boring economists on television doesn't sell. Like people aren't gonna turn on the TV to hear about like the
how we gotta
combination
get our house in
of
order
like
and
monetary and fiscal. Like that's just not like a popular thing. What do people want? They want checks in the mail. They want Social Security
Good
to
governance,
increase.
safety.
They want their potholes fixed and stuff.
Right.
And they don't want to worry about walking down the street and getting attacked or whatever.
Right,
so
right.
There's national security, right? And so
this is a bit wonkish for them.
But it's just like you can't have everything you want, but like you can't have your cake and eat it
We've
too.
never really learned that as a nation.
No.
Certainly not in generations.
No,
right?
exactly.
There are many other nations where the general populace is very familiar with the ills that can befall you.
I mean,
if
there
you
are
have
countries
bad
that
monetary
run
policy.
like surpluses.
Yeah. Well, and there are countries that have dealt with crippling inflation that actually blows up their entire economy and social order in their countries. And so those people are well aware of these types of issues.
Absolutely.
Americans really just aren't. So.
Yeah, I mean, Americans are
And we're
even
not,
untrained
there
with respect to inflation.
We're not there
we
now,
don't
but
even we didn't even understand inflation properly till like maybe even we still don't.
I know.
And so it's a very tricky dynamic.
Well, we're not there at the the societal or economic blow up with inflation yet, but I think what we're talking about is the very long term national debt that's going to tie this country's hands in terms of what it can do fiscally because of the interest on that debt. And you've got the central bank really not speaking about that part of the equation.
Correct.
And it's frustrating.
But because it's like it's not just about now. It's like 5 years from now, what does the profile look? 10 years from now, what does the profile look?
We've seen some estimates.
It looks awful, and the estimates are bad. The
Ray Dalio
CBO projections are not good.
They're not good. Yeah. Well, maybe if Bitcoin becomes more popular, people will learn more about a scarce, fixed commodity type money, and that will change some attitudes about and education about money and spending. That's asking a lot, but
I think that's asking the bare minimum because money isn't what it used to be.
Yeah. Beimnet Abebe, Galaxy Trading. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to our guests, Ryan Adam and Naveen Parmar. Ryan Adam, Economic Policy Advisor to Senator Tom Tillis, and Naveen Parmar, Chief Counsel for Senator John Hickenlooper. Guys, thanks so much for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Yeah, Alex, thank you for having us. This is Ryan Adam, and greatly appreciate to be here.
Being here, thanks again for having us, and looking forward to this discussion.
So we're going to get into it a little bit, and I have Ryan and Naveen here because their offices, Senator Tom Tillis and Senator John Hickenlooper, have introduced the PROOF Act, the Proving Reserves of Others Funds Act, which mandates proof of reserves and auditing requirements on crypto custodians and exchanges in the United States. It's a super interesting piece of legislation that, of course, I'm supportive of. But before we do that, maybe we start with Ryan. Tell us who you are, how you got into your position. I think people are interested to know how people who work in Washington get there. And then, of course, tell us about Senator Tillis and his interest here in this bill.
Sure. No, happy to, Alex. Thank you for the question. So, yeah, Ryan Adam, originally from Raleigh, North Carolina. So representing the home state and working for my home state senator. Senator Tillis's economic policy advisor. I also serve as the minority staff director for the Banking Committee subcommittee on financial institutions and consumer protection. So in that capacity, I lead most of Senator Tillis's efforts on Banking Committee. So anything that touches financial markets, financial institutions, fintech, and then also do some broader budgetary work for the senator as well too. Been with Senator for about 7 years now, and certainly have enjoyed my time here. And working for Senator Tillis is a pretty fantastic opportunity because he is, I think, a very pragmatic member of the Senate, very pragmatic member of Congress, and someone that is prioritizing getting stuff done a lot of times, and really is a pragmatic conservative. He often tells us about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I think that governs a lot of how we approach legislation through this office.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Naveen, same question to you, just maybe quick background on you and how you got to the Senate, and tell us about Senator John Hickenlooper from Colorado.
Yeah, happy to. Naveen Parmar, I'm the Senator's chief counsel. Like Ryan, I handle a policy portfolio that it consists of tax, banking, financial services, small business, fintech. As one of the lawyers in our shop, I also handle things out of the Judiciary Committee, which Senator Tillis also sits on. So things like immigration and voting rights, cannabis, et cetera. So wear a couple different hats for the senator. Prior to joining Senator Hickenlooper, I was the general counsel for the Committee on Small Business during the pandemic. So that was an interesting time trying to keep small businesses open through the Paycheck Protection Program. And a little bit about my boss. He used to be a former mayor, former governor of Colorado, two-term mayor, two-term governor. He's a first-term senator. I joined his senior team shortly after he was elected in the 2020 cycle. The senator, like Mr. Tillis, as a former governor, as a former executive, wants to get things done, wants to work across the aisle and with folks that he thinks he has some commonality with, and Senator Tillis is one of those folks. And then the fit for myself and the senator was he wanted to focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. I think there's only a few things. The senators in general have a lot of things coming at them. You can only maybe sometimes pick 2 or 3 things to work on, and entrepreneurship and innovation are 2 things that or one thing that the senator wants to focus on. And that was my background as working in small business policy. Seemed like a natural fit for him.
Thanks, Naveen. So I was thinking about, and I think our audience probably heard, that Senator Tillis is a Republican from North Carolina, Senator Hickenlooper, a Democrat from Colorado. Neither of your offices that I'm aware of, and correct me if I'm wrong, have previously been involved in policy issues related to digital assets or the crypto economy, at least certainly in terms of introducing legislation, while several other offices in the Senate have been. And I remember that Senators Tillis and Hickenlooper had given a speech at the BPC earlier this year, and they spoke about the deal-making caucus in the Senate and their interest on focusing on singles and doubles from a policy perspective. How does that deal-making philosophy inspire or influence your office's interest in working together on this proof of reserves issue? Maybe Naveen, I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. It kind of goes back to some of the things that I mentioned earlier. So the senator wants to get things done. Just the nature of the Senate, because of the way the rules are structured, you have to get 60 votes to get anything done or across the finish line. So that sort of relationship building and that ability to see different points of view and want to work across the aisle just sort of has to be a fundamentally part of if you want to get things done in the Senate and legislate. So that that combined with my boss's inclination to support innovation, support new ideas, and to support the entrepreneurship economy. I think that's what we're part of the Financial Innovation Caucus. I think that just from my background and the senator's background as well, he's a former small business owner. He's familiar with traditional finance and traditional access to capital and some of the struggles that some people face accessing traditional capital. I think that's part of the reason why he's interested in this space, is because unlike many industries like technology or aviation or what have you, I think the financial services industry has been lacking in innovation. I think there's sort of the same products and the same players over the course of 50, 60, 75, 100 years. And that sort of disruption might be needed in this industry. And I think that's one of the reasons he found this interesting, or is finding the aspects of blockchain and innovation in the financial services industry interesting.
Ryan, what about you from the Senator Tillis' office? What about the deal-making caucus discussed makes this seem like an interesting opportunity?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think Senator Tillis and Senator Hickenlooper certainly been there as well too. Has been kind of at the forefront of a number of the major legislative pushes that Congress has made over the last couple years. And I think Senator Tillis certainly, to kind of retreat back to what I said earlier with his comments about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Well, looking for singles and doubles is kind of the legislative way in which you do that. And so certainly, to your point, Alex, we haven't introduced other crypto related or other digital asset related pieces of legislation until the Proof Act. But that doesn't mean that Senator Tillis wasn't part of the coalition of the willing that wanted to work on this issue. I think we can certainly get into a larger conversation about where that stands and where that's going. But Senator Tillis certainly thinks that, some clear rules of the road are definitely necessary for the digital assets industry. And we objectively kind of saw the Proof Act as a good first step into that area that, was something that is easy to understand, an industry best practice, and certainly something that we think just, incrementally moves the ball forward in a productive way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, can we just talk a little bit about, because I see that this is a single and double kind of play, right? It's narrowly focused. I think I'll describe it as if I look at some of the larger comprehensive packages that have been proposed in both the Senate and the House, this is significantly more tailored. Just to build on that, Ryan, what about this? What was the strategy there? Why is this interesting as opposed to, say, signing on to, not that the others aren't, but why this also? Why the Proof Act also?
Sure. I think that's a great question as well. And it really kind of boils down to, on our end, we saw a very acute instance occur with FTX and the implosion of FTX, where there were a number of misgovernance and malfeasance actions that occurred there that, if you took something such as the Proof Act, would pretty readily address that. With FTX, you saw that they were commingling institutional and customer funds. And with FTX, you saw that they were diverting customer funds to a subsidiary, which was Alameda Research. And, I think Senator Tillis is a big fan of taking something that is happening, a real world event, and trying to craft a solution to that. And I think that's certainly something that Senator Hickenlooper brings to the table as well, too, in his approach.
Yeah, Naveen, maybe build on that and tell us also, what is the Proof Act, if you can start throwing that in at the end of this.
The Proof Act just simply says that, that crypto companies have to have the assets of their customers that they say they have. It's a pretty basic concept. It's a pretty basic, in terms of traditional. I got back to traditional finance. The reason we got interested in this particular piece of legislation is we sort of looked at the traditional financial services industry and said, there's things in the crypto industry that have flavors of that. And are there things? We sent a letter to SEC Chair Gensler, I guess about a year ago now, specifically stating, are there things you can do? Are there things you can do right now that you don't need a legislative path for that sort of mirror traditional finance? And the SEC Rule 15.3, I believe, is a brokerage custodial requirement rule, and we just thought that that's something that can be imposed on or layered onto the crypto industry right now. So that was the impetus for our joining this bill, because we thought there's just similarities that should be taken into account right now.
And Naveen, maybe start here with this question too. What is the path forward? So the bill was introduced at this time we're recording on Monday. It was introduced about a week and a half ago. Just for this bill specifically, a bill like this, what are the next steps? Is it a matter of talking with other members of the Senate and spreading the view of it, or where does this go from here?
Yeah, I think that's part of the strategy is opening up and having those conversations with other potentially interested members of the Senate. I mentioned earlier that it takes 60 members or to get something across the finish line on the Senate side, or at least it takes a lot of bipartisan work to get something across the finish line. So I think one thing we'll be doing is working with Ryan and working with Team Tillis on socializing the bill with other banking members, socializing the bill with other senators. I mean, I will say that I think when we first started, CRS or there's some research out there that bills generally take about 8 to 10 years to get signed into law from time of introduction to passing. So like this is one step in the process. But I think we're also looking for potential vehicles that are in the crypto space. If a vehicle would move, then we would be looking to potentially attach it to that. That's just sort of how things happen in the Senate, where you got to find some sort of legislative pathway or train, as we like to call it. And if there's a crypto sort of path for legislation, I think we'd be looking for an opportunity to add this to that.
Yeah, and I'd just add on to that I certainly think for Senator Tillis's perspective, for our perspective, that it's important to have something out there with our name on it that we kind of have on the shelf ready for the crypto and digital assets industry writ large. There has been a lot of talk over recent years about a much more comprehensive package. You've seen that come together to be introduced with Lummis Gillibrand, some of the other stuff that's come out of the Ag Committee jurisdiction. And a lot of how this institution works, similar to what Naveen said, is you get these large packages together, and then this gives both of our bosses an opportunity to be part of that coalition of the willing that pushes something forward. And so certainly it, in our minds, would be a really strong addition to any sort of cryptocurrency or digital assets related package, and obviously gets our bosses involved in that negotiation as well, too, which is an important point.
Awesome. Let's step back for just a minute, and I want to understand where I think FTX has certainly raised the profile of crypto in Washington, obviously not for good reasons. Where does crypto as a policy matter stack up against other matters Congress is facing, either in the broader economy or financial services, maybe specifically, Ryan?
Sure. I could maybe start with the Senate Banking Committee perspective, and we can kind of expand from there. But obviously, it's a hot button issue, and it's something that's incredibly important. That said, there are a lot of other moving pieces in the financial markets right now that are also incredibly important. I think that a lot of time and attention is being pulled away because of the Basel capital requirements, the holistic review by Vice Chair Barr at the Fed on capital levels within the U.S. banking system, and other actions by the SEC as well are kind of pulling away the ability and the bandwidth for members to address cryptocurrency and digital assets, with a lot of the rulemaking and the pace of rulemaking coming out of the SEC. So from the banking committee perspective, I think I've yet to see indication that Chairman Brown may want to move something in this space. That said, cryptocurrency and digital assets remains a pretty high priority for members of the House Financial Services Committee, and there may be some opportunity to negotiate something between the Senate and the House at some point in the future that includes at least some crypto-related packages.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Ryan was saying in terms of like Senate banking's priorities. I think we mentioned that the last few weeks have been tough in terms of the Congress doing the basic blocking and tackling of the budget. So I think short term, those kind of things will still be at the forefront, budgetary issues. And then, next year we're heading into an election cycle as well. So that sort of is a potential impediment as well. But I think there is an opportunity for, if a package does come together, there's folks like my boss and Senator Tillis and other House Financial Services members that care about this issue. And there's also like another angle. There's a lot of folks, and my boss is in this camp as well, really cares about consumer protection. So once you have those sort of like alignment of interests, where I think the Proof Act is something that creates some regulatory certainty for the industry, but also creates consumer protections. Once you have, my boss likes to talk about alignment of interests, and once you have those alignment of interests, there's a potential opportunity to do something.
Yeah, it feels like from my look at and thinking about the Proof Act that there is an alignment of interest, that both industry looking for, first of all, a number of regulatory issues in the United States, clarity, standards, but also this is something that clearly is designed to combat some of the malfeasance we've seen from some industry players. So on a consumer protection and safety basis. So One thing I like about that, I think that's a nice way to describe it. Naveen, I'll start with you on this question. So some in the crypto industry have referred to how some of the market regulators, specifically the SEC, have pursued and involved themselves in the digital asset industry as regulation by enforcement. Would you agree with that criticism? Or also, how important is it that Congress be heard on these policy matters in your mind?
I think we're actually on record on this, right? Like we had the letter that we sent to Chairman Gensler, like outlined both those points, that there probably are spots where the SEC, should be. There are probably like outfits out there that are probably acting as they're treating assets like securities and acting like securities in financial entities, and they should be regulated. But there has to be a balance, and I think Congress has a role to create some rules and create some guidelines so that the industry can know exactly what is a security and what is not a security. And I think that's exactly where someone like my boss and Senator Tillis are positioned, because to be like the voices of reason and not to be not a cheerleader on one side or the other, but try to be somewhat balanced in that approach. My boss was the governor of Colorado whenever we legalized cannabis. He was not supportive of that measure, but he saw it coming. The voters wanted it. Seems like in the crypto industry, that the industry's here. It's a $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion industry in the U.S. So it's here and it needs to be regulated. And I think he thinks about that in the same way as he viewed cannabis regulation, that it wasn't something he was for, but this is something that that it's required of public policymakers to sometimes put their big boy pants on and deal with industries or create rules and regulations for something that you may not agree with, but you also understand there's a market for it, and you need to sort of create some clear guidelines.
Yeah, I think that those are great points by Naveen, and I think Senator Tillis would echo a lot of the same sentiments. At the end of the day, we as Republicans in this office, I think, have been pretty concerned with a lot of the actions taken by the SEC. We see them acting even not so much as regulation by enforcement, but a regulation through public example of a lot of digital asset institutions and companies. While it's certainly right and correct for the SEC to go after bad actors in the system, trying to establish a regulatory construct where it's just one-off actions against specific companies to then threaten other companies not to take similar actions doesn't really establish any concrete or bright line rules of the road for companies to follow. And at the end of the day, I think with Senator Tillis's economic portfolio and how we try and think about legislation in this office, especially given the geopolitical implications going on around the world today, we want to make sure that the U.S. remains at the forefront of financial institutions, the forefront of financial and capital markets, and obviously the forefront of financial innovation as well. And so it's really important for there to be clear rules of the road that Congress establishes that's going to incentivize companies to stay here or start here, as opposed to having any sort of brain drain or talent flight to other jurisdictions.
Last question. I'll start with you, Ryan. What would you say to our audience here in terms of advice on how to interact with Congress and congressional offices generally, but on this issue specifically?
Sure. No, it's a good question. And I think Naveen kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier when he talked about the research that it takes average of 8 to 10 years to get something passed. Proof of reserves is a fairly niche topic, for a fairly niche concept. And I think to the extent that listeners and yourselves can continue to educate members that this solution is out there, that this solution is already an industry best practice and standard that can apply to instances of malfeasance like we saw with FTX, would be very important. Members to have a lot that are thrown at them, not only in the banking and financial services space, but with all the other issues that are on their plate. And it takes a while to get traction on some of these things, but that's not to say that it isn't important to continue to educate folks on it. So I think that would be my primary advice, is just continue to beat the drum for this.
Support for our bill would be much appreciated. I think the sort of grassroots advocacy is really, really important. I think folks outside of DC, maybe think that their voices are not heard whenever they come to Capitol Hill or whenever they interact with lawmakers. I can tell you from across the political spectrum, whether it's conservative or Democrat or liberal progressive, they listen to constituents and they listen to people that take the time to voice their opinion. So I would say two things: keep doing that, keep educating, keep advocating, and I would suggest also potentially, doing it in a way that is focusing on the policy and sticking to the facts. And I say this as someone who's worked in political entities for the last probably 15 years of my life. Like, try not to over politicize or strive to depoliticize some of the messaging. And not that I think I've seen some of that in sort of the space. And I think that helps sort of legitimize the industry, where you can just focus on the facts and focus on the policy. And that helps out people like Ryan and myself who are in the weeds on some of this stuff, and helps out members who have literally 1,000 things on their plate at any given day.
Awesome. Hey, Naveen Parmar, Chief Counsel for Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado, and Ryan Adam, Economic Policy Advisor for Senator Tillis from North Carolina. Thank you guys so much. And thanks to your offices for and the senators for their leadership on this issue.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thanks to our guest Naveen Parmar from Senator John Hickenlooper's office and Ryan Adam from Senator Tom Tillis's office, and for their office's leadership and support on the Proof Act. Fascinating, awesome bill that's been introduced in the U.S. Senate on a bipartisan basis. Also, thank you to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always. That's all we have this week. We'll catch you back here next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.